Tánaiste, today I want to raise a bread and butter issue with you, which has a real impact on the level of disposable income that many people have. And that is the 300,000 or so mortgage holders in Ireland who are paying a variable interest rate, which is way over the odds. It is completely unjustifiable, the interest rates that are being charged by banks in Ireland in respect of variable rate mortgages. In Ireland, somebody taking out a new mortgage on a variable rate can be paying anything up to 4.5% Tánaiste, compared to a euro area average of 2.5%. So if you take the example of somebody with a mortgage of €200,000, the difference in interest every year, Tánaiste, is about €4,000. That's over €300 extra per month that an Irish mortgage holder is paying compared to a counterpart in another Eurozone country. And that is completely unacceptable, Tánaiste, at a time when the cost of funds for the banks is declining. The net interest margin is increasing very significantly, and yet the cost of variable rate mortgages is not coming down, with the exception of the very welcome move that AIB has recently announced. The ECB rate reductions have not been passed on to variable rate customers in recent times, and yet the government appears to be completely disinterested in the issue. So my question for you, Tánaiste, is the government merely a neutral bystander on this issue? Does the government have a view on the interest rates that are being charged by banks in respect of variable rate mortgages in this country? And has the government specifically discussed this issue with the banks themselves and indeed with the central bank? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy McGrath. I think the first issue here is, of course, to place this in context. And I think everybody who has a mortgage, particularly younger people in the, say, 35 to 50 age group, particularly people who took out a mortgage in good faith when Fianna Fáil were in government at the height of the boom, were working, and house prices were in a bubble. Of course, we know that at a certain stage the banks stopped offering tracker deals, and of course the people who came after, and this was very much, as you know, Deputy McGrath, and I'm sure you'd be happy to acknowledge, it was very much on your watch that when the trackers ended, the people who came after the tracker period in fact faced variable rates. Now, of course, in financial structures, there are times when fixed rate can mitigate against people, and that's been true in financial history in Ireland. There are times when variable rates can offer both advantages and disadvantages. The critical thing, I think, here is that the banks should return to normal operational capacities, and they should do what banks should do, which is to offer funding and reliable sources of funding to people who have the financial resources, the employment structures, the income structures, which will allow them to borrow, and to borrow at a reasonable cost rate. As you said yourself, the move by the AIB in very recent times to bring back competition into the variable rate market is extremely welcome, and I welcome that, and I do hope that it is a move towards a more competitive offering by the banks in relation to mortgage costs, because I think it's absolutely critical for people. The banks, as you know, are working their way through their collapse following, and I saw the new managing director of PIMCO saying in the context of a recent conference in Kilkenny how absolutely foolish and misguided was your fatally flawed bank guarantee, and that's what destroyed the economic capacity of the country. The banks, unfortunately, Deputy, are still in a recovery situation, but I do hope that the banks are actually now going to move to more competitive offerings in relation to mortgage charges of all kinds, but obviously particularly interest charges to people who are either currently borrowing or to people who are anxious, and thankfully a lot of people are anxious, to purchase a house for their and their families' home in the future.
Thank you. Deputy McGrath.
Thanks, Ciarán Comhairle. Tánaiste, you took us on a very interesting historical tour there, as you see it, but you avoided the key issue and you avoided the direct questions which I asked you. The reality is, Tánaiste, that the cost of funds for the banks today is in the region of 1%. Bank of Ireland have put it on the record. Their cost of funds is 1.15%, and yet variable rate customers are being charged up to 4.5%. It is exploitative, Tánaiste. It is exorbitant, and there is absolutely no justification whatsoever for it, and it is being presided over by your government. Brian Hayes, who was up to recently Minister of State in the Department of Finance, but now safely ensconced in the European Parliament, has said variable rate customers are being fleeced. They're being fleeced, Tánaiste. And yet the government does not seem to have a view on this issue. The ECB rate is virtually zero. Anybody with savings will know the banks are paying little or nothing on deposits at this point in time. The cost of funds has never been lower, and yet the banks are milking it in respect of the profits that they are earning on variable rate customers. The banks are profitable again, Tánaiste. They are profitable, both AIB and Bank of Ireland. So there's no point in trying to spin this that it's all Fianna Fáil's fault. That's nonsense. The banks are profitable. They're accessing money at 1%. They're charging 4.5%. You're standing over it. And I asked you a very direct question. Does the government have a view on this? Has the government discussed this issue directly with the banks? And has the government discussed this issue with the central bank? If we could have some straight answers, it would be very helpful.
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned the central bank, Deputy McGrath, because, as you know, banks in Ireland are regulated and supervised by the central bank. And in fact, I would put it to you, Deputy McGrath, as have quite a lot of commentators in relation to the actions of your government in respect of banking, that there was a grossly inadequate supervisory model in place during your time, and when, well, sorry, please. The facts
only 1 minute to answer.
Sorry, I don't, in the questions that you're asking, the question I am wondering about is, do you actually recognise that the central bank is actually the supervisory authority for Irish banks? And let's be clear what we want in terms of Ireland. We want functioning credit institutions, which unfortunately your government destroyed. That is history, but unfortunately through your guarantee you destroyed. We set up a whole series of regulatory structures to ensure that the supervisory authority for banking in Ireland is the central bank. Now, you're a member, I understand, of the Finance Committee. Now, you have the power to call in the Governor of the Central Bank and to talk to the Governor of the Central Bank about their supervision of the rates in relation to the kind of mortgages that we've been talking about.
Thank you,
and that, well, sorry, you're actually ignoring.
Sorry, we're over
You're
time.
ignoring what? Sorry, in relation to the financial crash, what you're suggesting now is that we ignore the central bank and we go back to what Fianna Fáil used to do, which is that you called in the bankers and you ordered them directly. That's the road. If that's your policy suggestion, that's the way to return the country, should you get the chance, to another bank crash. That's what you're suggesting.